Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to From the Depths with me, Zicargo. We're here in the designer mode taking a look at a pair of submarines today, and these are both fairly small subs. I've got some larger ones in the works, but I really think I'm going to need to jump into the campaign and get my hat handed to me by something larger before I really know how to design against it. So I'm not going to be finalizing my later game larger designs. I've got three more planned and half-baked, but I'm not going to be finishing them up until after we get into the campaign. So this is the last prep video for the campaign, and it's featuring the Agitator light assault sub as well as the Subverter heavy assault sub. We're going to start with the light one here, taking a look at its missiles. These are pretty simple torpedoes here. We've got an APN to make sure that they hit, as well as a ballast to make sure that they are underwater. No signal processor, and very little just internal fuel, essentially. These things move at 96 meters a second, which is pretty quick for a torpedo. No regulator either, so they're kind of close range. I'd say the optimal range for these things is at about 2 kilometers, but they could certainly hit closer than that. They're not super maneuverable, so they might struggle against small craft. I don't know how useful they're going to be against the later game designs. Certainly this one, at least. Why are you pitching down? Did you run out of materials on me? You did. Oh, God. Anyway. What was I saying? Now, I don't think this is a particularly top-tier design. I think it's very much an earlier game support style kind of craft. It does have a lot of cost up front on propulsion, but that means it gets to use that propulsion very efficiently. So it's got really, really low operating costs. The craft is lacking 2 different types of defense. The first is smoke because it's underwater and it's got shields. I figure it probably won't need them. And the second is torpedo defense. Now it's lacking torpedo defense because most of my other surface boats from the Watcher Patrol boat has its little torpedo sonar dongle thing going beneath it. Same thing with the Beholder defense matrix and the Hive, my logistics ships, as well as my Blockadeer, the Dragoon also has that. So all of my ships that this thing would be fighting alongside have their own very strong torpedo defense. That being said, this thing does have a passive sonar and an active sonar, as well as an inter-vehicle transmitter. It has ERA on the front, which is not great defensively. Those are covering up propellers, so these propellers are a little bit exposed, and it would definitely be easy to lose these propellers, and these propellers are expensive. So I think this thing, I'm going to use it in the early game to help control territory. I might use it against the lightning hoods to soak laser damage. We'll have to see exactly how that turns out, but it's got an adorable penguin face. It's got a relentless barrage of fairly cheap and efficient torpedoes, and it's got, of course, the all-seeing eye on it as well. The other thing about this design is that it's got some gyroscopes, so let's take a look at the internals really quick. I've got 3 dumb PIDs controlling some stuff. The AI is in charge of some other stuff. I like to use dumb PIDs because you can start issuing your own commands. You can take over for the vehicle, and the AI will not fight you on it. So if you only use AI PIDs for controlling your pitch and you input a direct control, the AI PIDs shut off immediately. So you'll lose your automatic pitch correction. If you use the dumb ones, you can drive your own vehicles without having to worry about the pitch and the roll control if you need that, which is quite nice for submarines, aircraft, planes, all that stuff. We've also got in the back a set of control blocks back here because I refuse to use breadboards. One governs the shields, just making sure that we're not wasting engine power outside of combat, and the other one makes it so that the vehicle automatically reverses when it gets too close. So if you are trying to front side and maintain distance, something that I really recommend doing is, first off, using a PID to set it so that your main drive goes to negative whatever you want it to whenever you get in range. And second, if you go into the AI here, disallow reverse. Otherwise, your craft will attempt to turn and stuff while it is moving in reverse. If you disallow reverse, the craft is incapable of adjusting its turning so that it can drive in reverse. So if I allow reverse on this, basically what happens is we get within range, the ACB puts us into full reverse, and the craft attempts to turn around and face its rear to the enemy because it is still trying to approach the enemy. If I turn off allow reverse, so leave it like it is right now, the craft does not pathfind as though it is in reverse ever. So if you want it to constantly face an opponent and just jiggle back and forth, take reverse off. So do not allow reverse, do not check this box, and set up either a control block or a breadboard to make it so that the craft automatically retreats on its own without the AI trying to fiddle with it. The other thing, and I'll just talk briefly about the PIDs here. So if you want your craft to stay focused on an enemy opponent, what you want to do is set the derivative time as low as possible, either to 0 or to something in this range, and you want to set the gain fairly low too. So derivative time. What you need to know is that derivative time means it derives the adjustment it needs to make based on an average of the past few seconds. If you set this high, then your craft will swing wide from left and then wide to right, because it's based on the average of the last few seconds. And if it goes, it will just auto-correct too far if it is up too high. You want to set this low so that it will adjust quickly based on its current bearing, and not based on its bearing like 4 or 5 seconds ago. Because it will adjust quickly, you want to set the gain low as well. So if you're using a high derivative time, you're probably going to want a higher gain for a PID. If you're using a really low derivative time, you're probably going to want a really low gain on your PIDs. So if you're not used to PIDs, that's what I would just go ahead and say. The integral time is essentially canceling the derivative out. This can be useful to use sometimes, but in general, I just recommend that you set this off until your PID works, or unless you really know what you're doing, just set the integral time off, because otherwise it just makes it harder to interpret what's actually happening in your PID. So if you're new to PIDs, using an integral at any point can just make it more complicated and difficult to understand what your PID is actually doing. So I recommend for y'all PIDs to stay pointed at your enemy. Something like this setup is usually pretty good about it. Breadboard is also very good. ACBs can also be very good. ACBs and breadboard can give you better bearing control, unfortunately. So if you're trying to do something like a fixed particle cannon that stares directly at the opponent, you're probably going to want to learn ACBs and breadboard. I've decided that I'm not going to be using breadboard, so I will be avoiding that particular build style. But there you go. That's how I set up my yaw PIDs for stuff like this, and how I make the AI work with it. Let me know if you want me to include tutorial type stuff like that in these videos. I know for veteran players it might be a little redundant to say, but for newer players, who knows? Maybe that information was very useful. Speaking of, I want to talk very briefly about these gyroscopes that we've got in here. So these gyroscopes are not just cosmetic. They help control the roll and the yaw of the craft. So really quickly, if you want to make effective gyroscopes, what you need to know is you're using spin blocks with motor drive. The motor drive is very important, at least 1. You don't have to go all the way to 10. You can set it to less than 1 if you want to. Just make sure that it's for sure more than 0. That's really going to help add the torque to your craft that you're looking for out of a gyroscope. Second, you got to add some weight to it. It's just not, it doesn't do anything unless there's a little bit of weight on it. And third, adding additional spin blocks. What they do is you add the rotational speed of this one to the rotational speed of this one, and that just doubles the power that this spin block can, like the torque that this spin block can exert on your craft. And then these two add to this third one, of course, which just triples the third one's torque that it exerts on the craft. And that's way, way bigger than cranking up the motor drive on one spin block or another. So yeah, that's my recommendation if you want to use gyroscopes. We've done that for our turning gyroscope here as well. It does kind of rely on your craft being balanced. And if you want it to be like really strong correction, you do have to dedicate a fair bit of engine power to it. So it's not completely free, but it is quite strong and it is quite durable. And it doesn't produce any heat. So like this can alone control all the turning for the craft. and yet infrared missiles, if this was on like an airship, infrared missiles would never target it. Whereas if you had turning thrusters, infrared missiles would definitely target that. So just worth noting, that's one of the things that you can use gyroscopes for, and they're quite successful in this craft, so I'm a big fan of that. Now, in an actual campaign fight, I suppose, if it lost a whole arm, it would probably be below 80% in sinking, so I guess that doesn't matter too much, but for an airship, it would. That's it for the light assault sub. Let's go ahead and take a look at the heavy assault sub, which, in the time I've been recording this videos, had run out of materials. What a guy. And it also seems to have gone into shallow waters. Where even are we? Now that we are upright, this is the Subverter heavy assault sub. This is coming in at 77,000 materials, and there's kind of two major differences between the heavy assault sub and the light assault sub. So the light assault sub, it's got wireless transmitters, it's got receivers, it's got active detectors on it, and it's got a much larger front profile. It's very easy to see, it gets closer. The Subverter, it stays further away, and it has no active detectors on it. Instead, what it does is it has these sonar buoys that it fires, which connect directly to the AI over here. The AI, it has a direct local weapon controller attached to the missile, so there are no transmitters and receivers on this AI. This thing is, I believe, invisible to a wireless snooper, and it has a much sleeker, smaller front profile, making it harder to detect with sonar. If we just take a look in here, the active sonar detection range of this vehicle is 700 meters. The other big change, aside from the stealth attempts, is going to be the missiles. So these missiles are much longer. They've got a regulator on them, they've got some fuel, they move at 66 meters a second, which is not fantastic. I wish they were a fair bit faster, but they do, however, have twice the payload. It also has a better armor scheme, so it has a lot less exposed propellers on the front, that is. It has no shields, and it has a lot more engine power. This thing can move up to 34 meters a second when it really needs to. Taking a look at the inside of this one, we've got a little bit of weird things going on in here. First off, we've got a strategic antenna on this. This is going to be a little bit of a border defense craft. It might escort some of my resource vehicles. It's certainly faster than them, so it could help them. So it's got a strategic antenna on it, just because I feel like this is going to be the craft that helps me sort of secure my territory. And then we've got the engine in here. The cylinders, carburetors, and superchargers in that same sort of standard checkerboard. And once again, for the same reasons, we don't have an exhaust. We're using radiators. Especially when you're talking about a design that is armored in heavy armor, having a small exhaust out of your engine is just it's like a severe weak point. Like, the entire thing, since it's made of heavy armor, can get battered all over from explosive damage and just not care, but that one engine exhaust does care, and the engine behind it can get blown up if the exhaust gets destroyed. Actually, I like that. I like that being orange. I like it a lot. And then that's not a frontal piece of armor, so we can also switch that over to being a rubber. This is how I do a lot of designs, by the way. It's part of the reason why I don't generally do building streams, is because I usually pore over the details of something for a very long time. But there we go. We have dropped its active sonar detection range down to 418 meters, making it insanely hard to detect. And why is it not quite pointing at that marauder? A side note here, I figured out why this thing was not turning to look at the enemy. So basically, I had all of my propellers set up to be forward and backward and turners, and so what was happening is, as soon as it would get in range, it would just start full reversing, and this would cause it to slowly turn off to one side or another, and if it lost control of its life, it would just stay at 100% reverse and spiral out of control. So by making sure that I went through my propellers and switched them to be either pusher or turner, that solved the problem. So yeah, you'll have to let me know what you think of these submarine designs. I'm going to be putting these up on the Steam workshop in a little bit. I don't know how experienced my audience is, so I don't know how much, if at all, people want me to stop and try to explain how I did something. So if you want to see it, let me know. If you specifically don't want to see it, let me know. If you're here just because my craft look pretty, let me know. Or if you're here because my craft are ugly as all hell, or whatever it is, I'm curious to know. Other than that, I've been Zicargo. This has been fun. As I mentioned, this is the last episode before we're going to start working into the campaign. And I'll see you next time.